Hi, everyone. We'll start with a webinar at the top of the hour, but we thought we'd open up the webinar now and just see how everybody's doing, ask you where you're from or what your favorite season is or what show other than 13 Reasons you're binging on, or tell us whatever you'd like. We'd like to know who's joining us and that sort of thing. So, or not. You can just put it in the an answer in the questions box, I think is where you get it. Our screens look a little different. So for us, it's chat, but I think when you want to answer something, you have to answer in questions. Okay. Everybody's being quiet. And that's fine. Ah, we got someone. Tamara is from St. Louis metro area and she loves summer. Thank you, Tamara. Good to hear. I like summer more now that I moved to Wisconsin. When I was in southeast Pennsylvania, it was too hot and humid for me. But now I love summer. Spring's nice, but then my dogs track in mud, and they're a St. Bernard and a Newfoundland, so they have paws the size of Montana. So I just am constantly cleaning floors in spring. Well, or I should be cleaning floors constantly in spring. Let's put it that way. So we have a few more minutes yet. Okay, Quicks, did you do that?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Oh no, that's, I just want to make sure. So at the top of the hour, I'll also enlarge. I'll get PowerPoint up. It's just
Cool.
the way my screen is, I can't see much other than the presentation. So, because for some reason it goes full screen and then I can't see anything. So, and I don't know why. Thanks, Tamara. That's nice to know. She says the webinar is very much needed, so thank you. Hi, Larry. Larry McNabb. He's from Burlington, Kentucky. No binge watching here. I don't like that cold, but I don't like the extreme heat either. I'm with you. 5 days straight of 90 degrees or above here in summer's not start. We had the same thing. We just got over a big heat wave and ugh, I hate it. So if you're just signing on, we'll be starting shortly in about 4 minutes. If you want to tell us anything about yourself, we'd love to hear, or your favorite season, or if you're binge watching something other than 13 Reasons, whatever you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. Oops, but did I do that? Well, thanks, Larry. Larry said he appreciates all the webinars that we're putting together, and he works a lot with suicide prevention attempters and survivors. Thanks, Larry. I really appreciate that. That's good to know. Thank you. I have a couple ones that coming up too that I'm excited about. Next month is Bernice Pescosolido, I think is how she pronounces her name. She's going to be talking about stigma and suicide. In September, I have someone from Menninger who's going to talk about shame and suicide. And I'm working with others. I think October it's going to be Ursula Whiteside. And I'm working with somebody, she hasn't fully committed for August, so I don't want to say anything, but hopefully soon. All right, I'll start the PowerPoint and see if I can figure out that I can see other things, because I want to make sure I see questions while we're doing this. So there's got to be a way. Evidently not. Oh yeah, okay. All right. And you still have mouse control, right, Quicks? Okay. Okay, well, I have that it's 2 o'clock. So, should we get started? Are you there, Quicks?
Yep. All
Okay,
good.
because I have trouble seeing others. Okay, everyone, thank you and welcome to our webinar about 13 Reasons Why. I'm so pleased you're here. I'm Heidi Bryan. I'm a suicide attempt survivor, suicide loss survivor, and I am currently focusing on families of suicide attempt survivors and have a website afterattempt.com, and also my consulting, which is HeidiBryan.com. As the webinar begins, everybody will be on mute, but feel free to ask questions. We always leave time at the end. Is that okay, Quicks, at the end, or did you want to break throughout the webinar for, I should have asked you that before, for questions.
No worries. At the end is fine.
Okay. We usually, leave about 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. So, but if you want to ask questions throughout the webinar, please do. That way I have them ready for quick set by the end of it. So everybody else will be on mute. I think you will get a recording afterwards. And if you want a certificate of attendance afterwards, just send me an email and I'll send one to you. or anything else you need, I'm giving you my email right now. So, okay. So I'm so pleased to announce my good friend, the Quincy Lizine, or DeQuix or Quix, as I just said. DeQuincy's a suicide attempt survivor who's been active in suicide prevention since 1996. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from UCLA and completed suicide prevention postdoctorate fellowship at the University of Rochester. Dr. Lizine is the chair of the Attempt Survivor and Lived Experience Division of AAS and co-chair of the Consumer Survivor Committee of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. DeQuincy was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at the SAMHSA's 2015 Voice Awards. He's the CEO of Prevention Communities and author now of 2 books available, well, author of 3 books, soon to be 3 books, I think, but author of 2 books available through Amazon.com, 8 Stories Up, and 13 Answers for 13 Reasons Why. So without any further ado, I will hand you over to Quix.
Uh-oh, screen just disappeared.
Oh, good. Is it back?
Not quite yet, but I'm sure it'll appear in a moment.
Well,
welcome everybody. Back. Okay, cool.
Okay, it should be okay now.
That's good. It doesn't seem to be advancing.
Oh, well, it says you have control. How about on the lower right? I mean, lower left? Yeah, can you do it that way? They said everything worked fine during practice.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
All right, so main topics for today. One is just to try to go over kind of how popular this show is, 13 Reasons Why at Netflix. The second, if that goes, oh. All right, I'm not sure why that's, there we go. Why folks are so concerned about it and what the sensitive topics are. And my screen just disappeared. There we go. Awesome. Let's see. But really, 13 Reasons Why has a lot of different issues that they talk about from the teen perspective primarily, and also a little bit from the parent perspective, but primarily from the teen perspective during the show. Alrighty, my thing is kind of going crazy.
Did I just take over?
I think so.
Okay. All right, just let me know when you want to advance.
All right, let's go forward. All right, so we'll talk about kind of what impact the show has had, both kind of the positive as well as the negative, and we'll go forward a little bit. And then we'll talk some about the information and resources that are available for at least a few of the different topics that are covered in the show. All right, let's move to the next slide, I think. So first, how popular is this show? If you could go just a few forward, there are a few questions. It was a comment or a question if you've heard of 13 Reasons Why or watched at least some of it or have watched the whole first season. Usually when I'm talking to folks, most people have heard about it. Probably around half or so have watched at least some of it, but it's pretty long. So I usually get around a quarter of folks who have watched the whole thing, but not many people have watched the whole first season, and especially the second season, which just came out. All right, you see Heather says that she has read the book, watched some of season 1. Anybody else watched it? On to the second season, Taylor. Thank you. Anybody else watch first season or second season? The second season launched on May 18th, and the first season I think came out at the end of March last year. And at that point in time, I binge watched the first season and then watched all the webinars and such that were coming out around the show, and then have binge watched the second season pretty much that first weekend that it came out tonight. So let's go forward a little bit, talk a little bit about how popular the show is from the Netflix perspective. So here are the top 10 Netflix shows in terms of first week Twitter volume, and this is just for season 1. But you can see the one that's really, really tall is 13 Reasons Why. So the number of tweets that came out with just within that first week, about 3,500, completely dwarfing any of the other shows that were the top 10 shows that Netflix had. So you can see 13 Reasons is definitely one of the most popular shows that Netflix has kind of ever put on, actually. If you go forward. Another way to look at this is Netflix came out with a report that was the year in binging for 2017. If you can go forward 1, or let's go forward 3, actually. So 1 was the shows that we devoured, which means that you just had to say just one more show. And so Net 13 Reasons Why appeared on that. And then the second one there that you see is the shows that got us cheating. And what that means is shows where you were watching it with somebody and then you decided to watch one more episode without the other person being there. But then the third one is, even though some folks would watch it apart, a lot of folks were also watching it together as families. So it's the shows that brought us together in 2017. So across 3 of the top 4 issues that they had for binge watching on Netflix, 13 Reasons Why appears across all 3 of those. All right, let's go forward a little bit. So here's an overview of 13 Reasons Why, or what the show is about. So Clay, who's a teenage boy in high school, he gets 13 audio recordings that were made by his friend Hannah, and she made those shortly before killing herself. So the show pretty much takes off at the point where Clay receives the audio tapes, and this is a couple of weeks after Hannah has died. So one more. Each one of those audio recordings, Hannah pinpoints a specific person or a specific event that she says pushed her to her suicide. And we could just go 2 more, I think. So season 1, the show alternates. It focuses some on Hannah's version of events, her experience, and then other times talks about Clay and his classmates as they have the aftermath. Season 2, the show talks about different folks' perspectives within the context of a lawsuit that is happening where Hannah's parents are suing the school for negligence, basically, because they didn't appropriately respond to Hannah's request for help. So it explores different perspectives as opposed to the first season, which primarily looks at Hannah's perspective. Second season looks at the perspectives of a wide range of characters, including the principal and the school counselor, as well as a lot of the other kids that are in the high school. Okay, let's go forward. What we got? So why was there so much concern about this within the suicide community and within a lot of other mental health communities, counselor communities? If we could go forward a couple. As they, oh, sorry, let's go back one. So IMDb tracks kind of what the show ratings are, and you can see perhaps that for 13 Reasons Why it was given a TVMA rating, and what that basically means is that they were recommending that people who were under the age of 17 should not watch the show. Other places they had a TV mature rating for 15 and older, some also chose 17 and older. So internationally, the rating companies were saying that this show shouldn't be watched by folks who were younger than 15 to 17. But we do know that a lot of the kids who were watching this were as young as 11, 12, some even younger than that, watching this show. We could go forward. All right, so the Society of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology said that the show depicted in great detail teenage sexual assault, bullying, and suicide. And because it captures these issues in really graphic detail, that's why a lot of folks were pretty concerned about what the show was talking about to other people. Let's go forward one. So the idea is that some people in distress might take the wrong messages from the show and then try to kill themselves instead of seeking help. So the guidelines that we suggest to the media as suicide prevention community is to not sensationalize suicide, to not make explicit details about the suicide method, and don't make suicide seem like it's a good thing by glamorizing it or romanticizing it. And if you go one more. So in season 1, 13 Reasons Why pretty much did everything that the experts said not to do. And that's why we had so much concern about what was going to happen as a result of kids watching this show. Let's go to the next. So there were some negative outcomes that happened, and let's go to the Telegraph. Netflix drama was blamed for inspiring teen girls' attempted suicide. So a few parents felt that after their teens had watched the show, they attempted suicide. And we go another. ABC News had a situation where 2 Californian families had an actual suicide deaths by 2 teens who had been watching the show. In a couple of instances, folks even dressed up like Hannah was in the show and did a similar suicide method to the one that Hannah did. Go one more. So the Atlantic had this report from a study that looked at internet searches about suicide following the release of 13 Reasons Why, which found that the Google queries raised by about 20% and within the first 2 or 3 weeks after the show. And so that represented probably about 1.5 million more searches about suicide that occurred after the show came out. All right, let's go to the next. And then finally, the Huffington Post said that after the show aired, the Suicide Prevention Crisis Line at D.D. Hirsch experienced an uptick in the number of young people who were mentioning the show specifically during their calls looking for help. Okay, let's go to the next. But on the other hand, maybe the show did have some positive outcomes. Okay. So next. The Business Insider said that it did spark a rise in mental health helpline calls. So on the one side, you could say that having an increase in calls might be a negative indicator because perhaps more people were feeling suicidal as a result of the show. But on the other side, you could say perhaps the positive indicator because maybe there was a rise in helpline calls from folks who were already under distress and now they were seeking help. Okay. Try the next. The Today Show had 13 Reasons Why, giving parents a chance to discuss suicide with teens. Another couple of shows had interviewed parents, and parents felt like the show had some benefits in sparking conversations, and that's really what the 13 Reasons Why producers and writers really wanted to do, was to spark conversations about suicide and about sexual assault and about a lot of these other topics that are covered within the show. Okay, next. Finally, Psychology Today had 13 Reasons Why, Good, Bad, and Ugly. And they said that even though there were some bad issues that came up from the show, we saw perhaps an uptick in the number of folks who were thinking about suicide or talking about suicide, or perhaps more distress. On the other hand, again, it did open the door for some families and communities to discuss life as a teenager and particularly talk about some of the issues that folks might have been ignoring before. So kind of raise awareness about some of the issues that people might have been ignoring in the past. Okay, let's go to the next. So Northwestern University came out with a survey about 13 Reasons Why. They had an international sample. They talked to about 5,000 teenagers, young adults, and then parents. about the show, and some of the results that they had was that about 3 out of 4 teens and young adults felt that the show was pretty relatable. They could understand what the characters were going through. They felt like the situations were presenting what happens in real life. Over half the teens said that after viewing the show, they did talk to their parents about the various issues that they came across during the show. And a lot of the teens even talked to their parents whether or not the parents had watched the show. So a number of parents did watch the show, but even in the cases where they didn't watch it together as a family, or when the parents didn't have a chance to watch it at all, still the teens, at least about half of them, did talk to their parents about the show. Then after watching the show, about half said that they had apologized to somebody for the way that they had behaved or how they had treated people. One of the emphasis that Netflix wanted to have in the show was to get people to be more civil to each other, to treat each other better, and so that's one of the things that they asked about within the survey. And they also produced a segment called Beyond the Reasons, and they did this for both season 1 as well as season 2. And in the Beyond the Reasons, what they have is they interview some of the characters from the show, as well as interview some mental health experts, more so in season 2 than season 1. But what they do is try to talk through some of the issues that come up during the show. So they do try to provide some information, and they had this available on YouTube as well. And but even the folks who had watched this Beyond the Reasons, the majority of them, like 70 to 77% of them, felt like they did need more resources afterwards. The caution I would want to say about the survey, though, is that it was commissioned by Netflix. They didn't say that a whole lot in their reporting, but the survey was sponsored by Netflix, and so they did have real positive bias in the way that they asked a lot of the questions. They didn't really ask about whether the show had any negative effects, but they did ask about the different perspectives that folks had about the positive effects that the show might have had. Let's go to the next. So what are the teen topics that appear in 13 Reasons Why? And there's a whole list, but this is probably the main topics that appear. They talk about suicide, suicide attempts, as well as self-injury without any intent to die. That particularly comes up within the second season. They talk about bullying a lot. They talk about physical bullying, cyberbullying, where folks are getting bullied through use of text or use of posting on like Instagram. They talk about alcohol and drugs. In particular, in the first season, they kind of focused more on marijuana as well as alcohol. In the second season, they delved more into heroin use. For the crime and violence aspect, they have physical violence. They delve more into gun violence and a possible school shooting within the second season. For mental health, they talk about kind of both depression and anxiety, particularly with PTSD, which follows after the sexual assault series that they have. They talk about sex and relationships, actually probably within the first 10 minutes or so of the second season. You see teenagers about to have sex. And so the relationship aspect and the exploration of sex and sexuality happens a lot within the show. They talk some about diversity issues, so kind of how issues of race and socioeconomic class play into the whole situations that kids have within school. And then finally, they do have sexual assault. The first season primarily focuses on female sexual assault. Second season, particularly near the end of it, also goes into male sexual assault, so males as victims of sexual assault. So a huge range of topics that are covered, and pretty tough topics for parents to deal with. So the suicide prevention organizations did, sorry, you can go, Fred. The suicide organizations responded to this. Primarily, initially, it was kind of criticism about Netflix and about the show. And because they did have, they really broke a lot of the media guidelines. And so they responded to that by having different changes in season 2. They focused a little bit more on what characters would have done differently. So they kind of show them looking back in their mind and thinking about how they would have approached things a little bit differently, which is a little bit more in line of how you would want folks to approach things. So they do, this time around, show kind of how you would want to approach things more ideally. They show a few successful interventions. They also focused on the negative side of suicide to try to counterbalance what might have been more glamorizing before, and then focusing on the trauma that happens after a suicide attempt, because there's a really significant suicide attempt that happens at the end of the first season, and so they explore more about that in the second season. There's an international group that developed a resource, and I was happy to help out with that as well. That's 13reasonswhytoolkit.org. So that's a really great resource that's out there. It was developed by a group that included SAVE, as well as the American Association of Suicidology and International Association for Suicide Prevention. So a huge range of folks from Australia, from Europe, as well as from the US developed that 13 Reasons Why Toolkit. It goes into specific resources for parents, as well as resources for adolescents and youth, resources for educators, as well as resources specifically for the media that's reporting on 13 Reasons Why. So that's a resource that folks should definitely pay attention to. Netflix also came out again with that Beyond the Reasons series, and they have 13reasonswhy.info, which doesn't have a very good depth of resources, but the thing that they do well is to have resources in a huge range of languages. So on 13reasonswhy.info, people can click through and find languages and resources, at least like a helpline from various different countries. There's still some gaps though. When I looked at the resources that the suicide community had come out with, for one thing, a lot of parents don't have time to watch 2 seasons of the show, which is now 26 hours worth of watching, even binge watching for me. I mean, it takes, this would take over a week just to try to get through this amount of material. Another thing is that a lot of the mental health community has not focused on the experience that parents have or that adults have in watching the show and trying to talk to their teens about the show while they themselves are trying to process what's happening within the show. The scenes of sexual assault are very graphic. The scenes of suicide are very graphic, and that could impact somebody whether they are a teen or whether they are an adult. And then the last thing was just guidance on how to talk about the issues. Netflix and a lot of the others were saying that it's great that we have this show that encourages folks to talk about the issues, as if talking about the issues was enough to make the issues go away, but there's no guidance really given about how do you talk about these and what do you do after you start the conversation. What happens if you're talking to a youth about the show and then the youth says, yes, I have had that issue come up. There's not a lot of guidance given to parents about what do you do for the next steps. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, so some examples of what to tell parents. We can go a few forward, I think. So I want to talk about 4 main issues, and I'll just kind of go through these relatively quickly. It's suicide, bullying, sexual assault, and then substance abuse, to try to give some example about the way that I would approach talking to parents about the show. Because mostly parents are looking for trying to get some idea about how real the issue is, so that they can say whether the Netflix show is over dramatizing it or how much it really matches to real life. Whether or not folks should be concerned about their kid or the people that their kid are hanging out with. And then finally, how to help the kid, in terms of using the parent's own experience and resources that they might be able to pull from to talk about the issues. Again, if the kid is experiencing it, what do you do after that? Let's go to the next. So the first major issue, suicide. Let's go a couple forward, I think. So one is, how real is this? So using the 2015 YRBS survey, you can see here there's about 100 dots. You have to trust me on that, or you can count them. So 100 green dots, that's about 100 kids. And within that, the yellow would be the number who have had some serious thoughts about suicide within the past year. And if we go one forward, the ones that just changed orange are the ones who had had some level of planning. So most of the folks who had had some level of thinking did end up having some planning. If we go another, those ones in red are the ones that would have attempted suicide as a result of their planning. And if we go one more, ones that just changed purple, those 3 out of 100 will be the ones that had a suicide attempt that was severe enough to require medical attention. So I really wanted to put into context that the number of kids who are experiencing suicidal experiences is not as huge as the Netflix show might make it seem. And even after having Hannah's suicide death, a large number of the other characters end up being suicidal. So I do want to kind of balance that out compared to what's happening in real life. But then if you go forward, the other side is that suicide does still end up being the second leading cause of death for youth who are 10 to 24 years old. So as a result of putting those two things together, if you go forward, I like to say the balance is that suicide is a serious issue. So if teens are talking about suicide, it should be taken seriously. But on the other hand, it's not an epidemic. So to know the warning signs so that if it does come up, you can be aware of it, but not to be at the extreme of feeling like this is an epidemic and everybody should be in a panic state. Let's go to the next. Is just the Know the Signs campaign. This is a campaign that came out of California from their mental health services dollars. And this is a really great resource that's been developed. It's easy to use, it's understandable, it's pretty simple. It goes through the different signs that would be warning signs or indicators that somebody might be thinking about suicide. So that's an excellent site, excellent resource to go to. All right, let's go to the next. So parents do ask, how do I help if you have a child who has been suicidal? And let's go forward. So one of the things is after a suicide has happened, if we go forward one, I think we have SAVE as one of the resources. So Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. Again, that's one of the groups that put together that 13 Reasons Why Toolkit.org. They have information about coping with loss as well as information about understanding suicide. And if we go one more. They have 13 Reasons Why talking points. So they did a series of talking points in association with the JED Foundation. They kind of walk through, when you're looking at 13 Reasons Why, what are the main things to keep in mind? So some of the main things that they might talk about are like making sure that folks know that suicide is not something that's glamorous. It's often connected to mental health issues, although Netflix didn't really emphasize that part of it. And things like reinforcing that this is a fictional show. And so you shouldn't take what the characters say as being recommendations or being what happens in real life. Okay, let's go forward. Okay, let's go to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Another group that has information about having lost somebody to suicide. And AFSP was also very involved in the second season, being one of the consulting organizations. And Christine Moutier from AFSP appears in the Beyond the Reasons for the second season and talking about suicide and suicide risk. Let's go forward. All right. Another great thing that AFSP did do in responding to the first season, was to come up with a webinar that was a teachable moment using the 13 Reasons Why to initiate helpful conversations. And they did this in conjunction with the American School Counselor Association and with the National Association of School Psychologists. So they did try to work with the folks who are involved very heavily in working with students in the schools and to talk through 13 Reasons Why as it appeared in the show. Let's go forward. Next would be kind of dealing with the suicidal crisis. And if we go forward, SPRC is the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and they have a lot of information that's available depending on the different audience about suicide risk, and about prevention. Let's go forward from there. They have specifically pulled together 13 Reasons Why resources. So what they did was kind of compile the different places that have talked about 13 Reasons Why and different ways to approach discussing the topics. But again, a lot of the folks that had focused in those resources kind of gave some basic guidance, but didn't really delve into how do parents really discuss this issue with the kids. We have the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's a great resource, and it is 800-273-TALK or 8255, and that is available 24/7 for anybody who has feelings of psychological distress or people who are really emotionally disturbed by things, and they can help folks walk through whether somebody does have suicide risk or not. Let's go forward. The last one that I'd mention would be AAS, American Association of Suicidology. Very good for walking through the facts and figures and countering a lot of the myths that are out there about suicide is some of the main ways that AAS is helping folks in the public. Let's go forward. All right, so how do I advise people to talk about their own personal experience when they're parents and talking to their kids about suicide? Let's go forward from there. One thing that we don't really talk about as much is that the parent might be a loss survivor. And in that case, things like particularly that last episode in season 1 where Hannah does die by suicide, and it's really graphically depicted, might be particularly tough for folks to watch. And we don't really know how many of those parents did have the opportunity to grieve. So again, some of those resources that we've pointed to for responding after a suicide shouldn't just be recommended for the kids, but should also be recommended for parents when they have had to deal with a suicide loss in their own personal story. Forward. So again, the reactions to the show might be different for somebody who has lost somebody to suicide. And it's good for parents to be able to talk to their kids about that so that the kid understands why the parent might want to skip out on certain episodes or skip out on certain parts of it. Now, one of the things about being a loss survivor, the show did better in the second season is they did do some consultation with loss survivors in trying to depict more accurately what Hannah's mom would be going through after the suicide loss of her daughter. And forward. The other thing to kind of counterbalance that as well is to know that because some aspects of suicide risk can be inherited, it's important to have that conversation with the kids earlier rather than later, so that they understand kind of that this might be something that runs in the family, so it should be something to keep awareness of or to keep a watch on, be more cautious about. Next. And then the final part would just be connecting on the emotional experience, not necessarily focusing on the details, don't need to go into the graphic details about things, but if somebody does have an experience that's related to suicide, then connecting on that emotional level and bringing some empathy to the conversation can really help to connect with the teen who is going through their own kind of suicidal experiences or suicidal ideation. Next. Second issue is bullying, and Netflix really heavily emphasized bullying as being a topic of concern, and they did that in season 1. They do it again in season 2, perhaps even harder in season 2 than in season 1. So let's talk some about bullying. How real is bullying as a topic to be concerned about? Let's go forward. So when I was a kid, we really thought bullying was kind of like this. So very physical aggression, or maybe like the next one, maybe something like this, right? So really aggressive kind of physical bullying as being something that's what we think about bullying as picture, at least I did when I was initially thinking about it. However, if you go forward, for today's kids, it might be a little bit more like this. So folks feel the pressure that comes from cyberbullying, where people are really just using the screen to attack people, and they're using what folks are saying online to really shame people, to make them feel guilty, or to make them feel bad about themselves. Or it might be something like the next one, where folks are just getting text messages that are spreading around that are calling people all kinds of names, and then you see the possible emotional impact that's had on somebody, particularly when folks are able to now have access to technology that allows them to really quickly post messages and really destroy somebody's social environment much faster than they were before we had smartphones and technology that allows them to spread things that quickly. So going to next, so the different forms of bullying, right? So there's physical, there's social relational, which means kind of spreading rumors about people or talking negatively about them. And then cyberbullying is doing basically the social one, but using technology as a way to achieve that. All of those are showed within Netflix 13 Reasons Why, and there's not a simple connection to suicide risk, right? There's higher risk for the person being bullied, but there's also higher risk for the bully. And so that's something that they don't really focus on as much in Netflix, but it is something that we would want to talk about if we're talking about bullying more as it appears in real life. And next. The other thing, Netflix kind of makes it appear like bullying is rampant in high school. So I want folks to really look at whether or not that is true. So next. What we really see is that for the percent of students who report bullying, to go next, it really declines over time. So it peaks, particularly for girls, within middle school, and then goes down towards high school. And one of the things that folks have talked about for why this might be is that in middle school, folks start getting access to technology. So it gives them a new platform to be able to do that social bullying, that cyberbullying aspect of it. And then as they mature a little bit through high school, now they've had a chance to kind of work through that, it tends to go down. So the bullying actually peaks in middle school, not high school, like it's depicted in 13 Reasons Why. So you might want to focus on kids who are a little bit younger than you might think otherwise just watching the Netflix show. And probably the main resource right now for bullying is stopbullying.gov, where they really do pull together information fairly well in talking about bullying and talking about how do you address bullying for both the folks who are the victims as well as folks who are kind of the perpetrators of bullying. Okay, let's go forward. Third issue, they talk about is sexual assault. So again, how real is this? So you have some idea about how much the Netflix show matches up to real life. Next. The majority of sexual assault victims are actually under the age 30. Most of them are in that 18 to 34 year old range. So even though the Netflix show really focuses on sexual assault within the high school years, one of the places where we should be really emphasizing attention to this is in that young adult phase. So it does happen to folks who are under 30, but I would like to see it more realistically depict what's happening to folks who are in that young adult range. Okay, next. They do, however, do a good job at depicting that this is an issue that really impacts a large number of women. So 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of either an attempted or completed rape within the lifetime. So 15% completed, 3% or so attempted rape. And then the next. The thing that they don't really talk about as much, particularly in the first season, is that male college students, particularly in college, have a higher risk, 5 times higher risk, actually, of being the victim of rape or sexual assault. And next. Let's see. So 8 out of 10 cases, the victim did know the perpetrator. That's what they show within the Netflix show, and that is pretty accurate to real life. And the next. About 33% of teens have gotten some type of abuse while dating. So dating violence is something that they talk about in the show. And if you go to the next one, about 4 out of parents don't know. They don't think that teen dating violence is an issue. So this is one of the reasons why 13 Reasons Why really focuses in on sexual assault and on the dating violence aspect, because a lot of people have been putting a blind eye to this. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that in some ways, 13 Reasons Why is more about sexual assault and bullying than it is about suicide. Suicide is kind of the ultimate outcome of what has happened when somebody has been impacted by these issues. But in terms of the amount of time that they spend talking about issues, it primarily focuses very much on bullying and on sexual assault, because they really do want to emphasize that this is something that teens are grappling with. Next. So some of the resources, I believe. How do you help? Right? So let's go forward. If they do have personal experience, the episodes again could be triggering, because they do a pretty graphic depiction in I think at least 2 or 3 episodes within the first season, and then another 2 or 3 episodes within the second season, with particularly graphic ones within that final episode in season 1 and the final episode in season 2 as well. Next. So one of the main resources that I point people to is RAINN. And if you go one forward, they have an actual sexual assault hotline. Okay, it's free and it's confidential, and you can also do chat as an option to do it online. And then one more, because we do talk about ongoing experience, so domestic violence as an issue, again, that dating violence aspect of it. If you go forward, for that one, there's 2 main resources. One is loveisrespect.org, and that one focuses on teen dating relationships and dating violence, and within the context of adolescence. And then the last one being the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Both of those are connected in terms of the organization, but that one is more for adults. And next, let's go forward. The final issue that I talk about is substance abuse. So how real is this? And what are the real, what's happening in real life? In 13 Reasons Why, it depicted as being something that's kind of a rampant issue. So everybody seems to be doing drugs and alcohol. But here are the results from the 2017 NIDA survey. For use of alcohol, it's gone down over time, particularly for folks who are younger, so like 8th grade, because we have been focusing a lot on reducing the use of alcohol among our younger kids. Next. As you can see here, the part that they circled for the NIDA survey was to show that at this point in time, marijuana has pretty much overtaken the use of cigarettes as an issue. And I've seen that for sure here in the work that I've been doing in Fresno County, where marijuana has taken over as being the #1 issue for kids, as well as some of the work that I've done in Iowa, where we saw that marijuana has pretty much become the #1 substance being used by kids. And then one more. For non-medical use of Vicodin, we see a lot of focus on the opiate crisis, and that is primarily something that is happening in our adult communities, not so much within the kid communities. As you can see, it's really declined over time, and it's not as much of an epidemic in terms of kids, but more in terms of adults. Next. Yeah, so should you be concerned? Let's go forward from there. The main resource that I point people to is the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, and if you can go one more, I think it'll just do the series. The Partnership for Drug-Free Kids talks about pretty much every single drug that is out there. It shows you what it looks like, it shows you what it's called, and they talk about how parents might be able to discuss the issue. And if you go one forward, they have confidential support, where they have some people who are families who have dealt with substance abuse within their own families, as a confidential hotline for other parents to talk to them and to find out what they might be able to do to help their kids. Okay, let's go forward. I think we're pretty much done. All right, so bringing in the parental experience, here's some of the tips that they got from the partnership. One is thinking about past or present alcohol or drug history. And this being a good time when the parents are thinking about their kids' substance abuse is a good time as well to talk about the parents' own substance use and whether or not they need to get some help. And next. The kids might ask parents about their experience, and as the partnership says, and I really agree, it's good to be honest, but not necessarily to have to share every detail. So it's good to talk about whether or not the parent had substance use currently or in the past and why they did it, and really to connect around the emotional aspect and the motivation behind the drug use, and then bring in their own parental advice about how do you now deal with the types of issues that you were before, but using the experience that you have and the knowledge that you've gained since then for the larger array of ways to kind of deal with that problem. And next. So again, the focus is having the kids have a realistic understanding of what the substances might have for pros and cons, and then be able to make good choices about it. Next. Connecting with the team about their desired feelings and goals, again, exploring the range of options. And let's go to the next one. Season 2, let's go forward. Talk some about season 2. They talked about the aftermath of Hannah's suicide as it continued to affect kids. They even had kind of what I call Ghost Hannah, who comes back and interacts some ways with Clay as he's thinking through the experience. And next, there's the other suicide attempt. So the kid named Alex had a severe suicide attempt at the end of season 1, and then he has to deal with that throughout season 2. And forward, there's the potential for a school shooting, and I'm not going to give away whether or not that actually happens, but it builds within the entire second season. You kind of see how that psychology of a person who might do a school shooting might develop. Next, there's homelessness. One of the kids who has a parent who is using drugs and lives as well with a drug dealer ends up being homeless at the end of the first season, and they explore that a little bit more as well within that second season. And next. And there is that lawsuit against the school. That's kind of the focus for the entire second season, or that's the context that they use for it. Okay, next, I think we're just about done. So any questions or comments? Happy to take them either now or whenever. You can send me an email. I've spent a lot of time with 13 Reasons Why, obviously, and so I have kind of grappled with a lot of the issues that they've talked about within the show. I will turn it back over to Heidi.
Okay, excuse me. Thanks, Quicks. I really appreciate this, and sorry. I'm just trying. All right. I really appreciate it, and I know I'm just thinking about so many things, so I'm hoping that there's some questions because I'm still sorting out my thoughts about the, because I read the book when it first came out, but I haven't watched the series because I just didn't want to. I just thought I work with this all the time. I don't want to see this. So I don't, and I probably won't because I figure I might get triggered. Why should I go through that?
Yeah, it's a pretty rough show to get through.
Yeah, so I appreciate you watching all of that. So I don't know. Do they do an accurate job of things, or do you think they're just kind of sensationalizing it so that people watch?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think a lot of things they really over dramatize because they do want to emphasize different aspects about what teens are going through. So they really hard pound on sexual assault as well as on bullying. They kind of skirt over some of the other issues. But like I said, for a lot of things, they over dramatize it. At some point, almost all of the kids who were around Hannah end up being suicidal to some degree or another. And so they really kind of make it seem like a lot of these things, drugs and alcohol, sexual assault, as well as the suicidal ideation is more rampant than it actually is.
And I just want to say too, I want to thank you for pointing out about the parents' perspective that they might be lost survivors, that they may have had an attempt at some point in their life too. That, I don't think anybody's thinking about they might have a reaction too, and how do they deal with that and deal with their child watching it. So I really appreciate that. I thought that was a very good point that you made. So we have a question from Ursula. Hi, Ursula. What do you think Netflix should cover next? What about psychosis since it developed so young?
I think they should stop. In some ways, it's interesting. A lot of what they present for, particularly for Clay, how he goes through things, it's not really clear whether he is experiencing kind of hallucinations about his friend Hannah, who has been lost, or if it's something that is just kind of, that's their dramatic way of depicting his memory of her. But it really does really kind of tiptoe around that in terms of having full-blown psychosis. For the most part, the Netflix show doesn't talk about specific diagnoses. They kind of hint at it and depict things, but they don't really talk about specific diagnoses. So it's not really clear. A number of the kids, they talk about whether they've taken medication or if they've seen a doctor, but they don't talk about what they have had particularly. So it's not really clear how they would do that because they're not so good about talking about specifics.
Interesting. And then Ursula has a follow-up question. What are your thoughts on how we balance art and safe messaging?
I think the way that we do that is we try to have shows like Netflix do their best around making sure that things are at least fairly safe. And then it's up to us as professionals to take it from there and to lead the discussions with parents and with educators about where do you go after something like 13 Reasons Why or other shows that might come out after that spark the conversations. So you let the entertainment industry go for what they're doing with sparking a conversation, as long as it's safe and not really promoting extra suicide, but let them spark the conversation because that's what they're really good at, is grabbing people's attention and sparking conversation. But we need to lead the conversation after they get it started so that it can go in a healthy direction.
Yeah, good point. Anna Hamilton asks you, so you don't tell us too much of season 2 of the show. Any suggestions on how to prepare ourselves, schools, organizations from the topics presented, especially school shootings?
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to balance between talking about the show and not giving too many spoilers about what happens to it. But if folks don't mind having spoilers, I'm happy to talk to you about it specifically one-on-one. But in terms of what happens during the second season, they really, the person who is the potential school shooter is featured probably in the first episode or two as saying that things at the school are worse than ever. And he really gets bullied a lot. He ends up really taking a lot of pressure in various ways. There's so many different places within the second season where you just kind of shake your head and you go, well, I could see why he's kind of going off the ledge. And it kind of starts within season 1, but then definitely picks up within season 2. And they did that on purpose to kind of have folks be able to possibly more identify with why somebody might get triggered to the point where they find violence to be their answer because of power dynamics, and because of kind of themselves not really caring about what happens to them, and in terms of family stress. So they really try to delve into what might create the psychology behind it. So it's kind of hard to talk more about what happens with the school shooting aspect of it, as well as kind of the sexual assault and PTSD aspect of it, without talking more specifically about what happens to specific characters.
Okay. So now more questions are coming in. So from Cheryl, Mycock, I guess. Hi, Quicks. How do you help others process the justice system issue in the second season of letting off the athlete who raped more than one girl? And Cheryl's from Andy's house.
Yeah. So that is kind of it's a tough issue, because they do show, in some ways, what is accurate, in how the justice system treats people differently depending on their socioeconomic status and in terms of race. So that's one of the topics they talk about fairly heavily, I think, in season 2, is differences of diversity and how different people get treated. They do talk a lot about socioeconomic class, contrasting the rich athlete Bryce versus the poor athlete Justin, who ends up being homeless. They talk a lot about race when you talk about like Jessica's experience, who ends up being one of the people who testifies about the rape and sexual assault, compared to somebody like Hannah, who is Caucasian, coming from that perspective, but now she can't really talk about it because she has died by suicide. So they really delved into how issues of kind of race and class interplay with a lot of the topics that they are discussing, such as sexual assault. But in terms of the justice aspect of it, I think that they go kind of overboard with how lightly the person who is the rapist gets off. But I think that to some degree it's fairly accurate about how our system does differentially treat people based on kind of how they are, how much power they have within the system.
Thanks. Joanne Loudermilk says, I am looking forward to hearing other perspectives, having watched both seasons. And then Tamara says, I do not mind spoilers. I refuse to watch, but I have compiled documents with resources to help those in need for possible episode triggers. So now I have a question too for you. So I know you wrote the book for the season 1. Are you writing a book for season 2?
I am revising the first book, and trying to incorporate a lot of the new issues that have cropped up kind of in season 2. It's taken a little bit longer than I anticipated for the revision, because there are so many different ways that I kind of wanted to reorganize things that cover the different topics and pull it together in a way that would be more helpful to parents going forward from here, and possibly try to head off some of the stuff that might pop up if they do a season 3.
Okay, good, because I think just the resources you gave here in the webinar are really helpful and good, and your perspective is really excellent. So I'm glad that you're writing another book on it to help everyone. So yeah, so let us know when it comes out so we can promote it.
Sure will.
So, I have one more question, because we're at the top of the hour, but I have students who are watching this grade 6 through 8 without parent supervision, and their dialogue makes me very nervous. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. So it's hard to say kind of what impact this is going to have altogether. In some ways, having the dialogue is good, but I would like to see more guidance around how do you have that productive dialogue. They tried to pull together some good resources at that 13 Reasons Why toolkit.org for parents to have those discussions. I'd like to see more guidance around that, like specifically how do you talk through a lot of the issues that come up. And one of the things like I had emphasized in some other areas is what happens if a parent hasn't had a chance to watch the show and their kid wants to talk about the issues, and the way that they talk about it is by saying, you know, I've had an experience like Jessica, and you don't know who Jessica is. So that's one of the things that I want to try to do in the book, is at least give folks a headline of who the characters are, what their main topics are, so that if a kid is talking about something in a certain way, it'll be a lot easier to pick up on what it is and to be able to address it successfully with different information and resources.
Okay, thanks. Okay, as I said, we've reached the top of the hour. Again, if anybody wants a certificate, or I guess since you had so many good resources, if you wouldn't mind if they get a copy of the slides,
for sure.
right? If you want a copy of the slides or a certificate, just email me, Heidi@HeidiBryan.com. Thank you, Quicks. This was a great webinar. I really appreciate you doing this. Hopefully next month, our webinar is going to be on stigma and suicide. And I also wanted to say that I'm working on releasing my course for families who have had a suicide attempt. I'm not going to give a date because it seems to be a bit more fluid than I would hope, but it's going to be soon. So keep you'll be getting emails from me as soon as I release it, or as soon as it's available for purchase. So, but I'm excited about it, especially, pardon?
At the end is going to be awesome. It's going to be very informative.
I hope so.
For people, I think.
I hope so. I've been working on it pretty long and hard, so I hope it'll be helpful. So, okay, everyone, thank you again, and I'll see you hopefully next month. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks.